Hey guys, Joe Madden here, the Joe Madden Sports Podcast. I am joined by Evan Dammarell at Am Not Evan on Twitter, editor at Fear the Sword, and host of Locked On Cavs. Evan, how's your morning going?
It's going. It's surprisingly sunny in Cleveland right now. It's been rainy and kind of dour the last few days, so I'll take it. We were talking before we actually hopped on about how the weather in Calgary is pretty similar, just with snow or nothing in between. So I'll take whatever sunshine I can get. So, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Really appreciate your time joining me here today. We're going to talk some NBA, some Cleveland sports. I'm excited to hear your take on your Browns this season. You want to jump into the NBA first? But before we do that, I want to hear, Evan, how did you start in this business?
So that's actually kind of a funny story. So my background is in engineering. That's what I went to college for, and I did sports blogging on the side. Actually, my senior year of college, a website called Hashtag Basketball put out a call to action asking for people to write about fantasy hoops. Full disclosure, I knew nothing about fantasy hoops, but I did work for my high school paper growing up, and I was the editor there, and I loved covering sports then. And I'm like, let's give this a shot. So I started with the Charlotte Hornets, and then I transitioned to them in Team USA, and then I dropped the Hornets and covered the Cavs, which are my bread and butter, my wheelhouse, and then it slowly progressed. So I moved from there to Fansided with King James Gospel there, and then I was with Forbes for a couple years, and then my co-partner and co-host on Locked On Cavs, Chris Manning, brought me on at Fear the Sword, and then Meta, then known as Facebook, approached me about going fully independent. So I took the jump and I quit engineering entirely, and now I'm a full-time writer, and this is my passion, this is my wheelhouse, and this is where I've been. It's an unconventional journey. I've talked to kids about it. I've talked to kids in college and high school. I'm just like, listen, my path by no means is normal, but I always just tell people like, hey, if there's something you love and there's something you truly want to pursue and make your passion in your career, don't ever give up on it. Don't put a price on your happiness, because in engineering, you have a lot of financial security, obviously, but I wasn't happy, and this is where I found I was happy, and I found a lane to pursue that. And I tell kids like, hey, if you want to be a dancer, if you want to be an artist, if you want to be an engineer, unlike me, pursue it. Don't give up on it.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of where I'm at. Like I said, unconventional path, but incredibly fortunate and blessed to be where I'm at.
Well, I'm glad that you are living your passion with your work for sure. Tell me about Locked On Cavs. When can we see that show?
Okay, so funny story. I had a couple guest appearance on Locked On Cavs, and Chris, my co-host, said like, "Hey man, we have like a really good rapport. We have a really good chemistry. Would you consider co-hosting with me?" And I scoffed at him and said, "Absolutely not. I will never co-host a podcast because I dislike the sound of my own voice. I can't imagine people hearing this 5 days a week, because Locked On Cavs is a daily look into what's going on with the Cavaliers and then the NBA in general. We have all 30 teams covered in the network itself, but Chris caught me at the right time, right before the pandemic took off. I had a lot of free time working from home at that point, and I'm just like, you know what? Let's try it for 2 weeks. We'll see if I like it. And then after 2 weeks, I started to like it. So I've been doing it for almost 2 years now at this point, and it's been a dream. I love it. So you can find us anywhere you get your podcast: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, you name it. We're also on YouTube 5 days a week. We're a video production now too, and we're now part of the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, just nebulous as well too. So if you are local, you will see us on like news stations like WKYC, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. certain days a week, just at random. And also, just like I said, we're on YouTube 5 days a week. So if you like the sound of my voice and like looking at me and my brick wall in my apartment, by all means, come check us out.
Congratulations. That is awesome. Glad you stuck in there. Glad you gave it a 2-week trial. What time daily did the shows drop?
So it kind of depends. During the season, it's a little different. So we usually try to record since I'm on the beat, I'm at a lot of home games. So usually when I get home, or if Chris and I are there, we find a way just to record almost soon after the game. We do media availability. We'll clip that. We'll take audio from that. So we try to get them up first thing every morning. But now that we're in off-season mode, we're kind of scaling things back. Right now, it varies. But usually our goal is around 10 to 11 a.m. every morning Eastern time.
Okay.
And if you can grab it there, you're good. But like I said, we're anywhere you can find it, and we do 5 episodes a week, so it doesn't hurt our feelings if maybe you miss one or two, because I understand if maybe that's roughly 2.5 hours of your time consuming Cavs content might be a bit much. And I understand if you can't get that, but that's where you can kind of find it every day.
Okay, that is great. Well, let's talk some NBA. Great lead into that. We saw the Golden State Warriors just dominate the Dallas Mavericks last night. Were you surprised by that?
I was a little bit, because if you look at it this way, you have a team like Dallas with Luka Doncic, and up to this point, no team really has had an answer for him, and he's single-handedly knocked out the Suns, who, when the postseason started, were kind of my pick to win the NBA championship just because of how much they dominated to folks during the regular season. I mean, contrary to what Patrick Beverley may have said, but the Mavericks look sharp. They look tough. I think my co-host and I were talking about this a little bit. I picked Golden State to win this series in 6, but I'm not necessarily surprised, just because maybe the moment's a little bit too big. And I think just because of how smart and how seasoned this Warriors team is, especially with Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, Steve Kerr as well, and the coaches on Golden State's coaching staff, where you have a relatively fresh and inexperienced Dallas squad. I think this is good for the NBA if Dallas kind of finds their way, because Luka is, or could be, the face of the league next to Giannis for years to come. And I think on an international level, that's huge. But I'm not necessarily surprised, no, but I'm more intrigued to see how Dallas responds to this first punch, because I think it's going to be like a boxing match where you have to see what their response is to getting hit and how they get back up and respond in game 2, because I could easily see them winning game 2 as well and shifting the momentum back towards an even series again.
Yeah, it would be great to see them come out strong in the next game for sure. Get those points on the board. Held to only 87 in the last game by the Golden State Warriors and allowing that 112. So definitely some adjustments that will have to be made going into the next game. But tonight's game, we have the Boston Celtics taking on the Miami Heat. Miami, the favorite in this. Do you think they pull off 2 wins in a row?
It really depends on whether or not Marcus Smart can play. I don't think he'll make like a huge difference for Boston offensively, but he is the heart and soul of that team defensively, and he really scraps and knows ways to kind of help Boston get through it. But it's an interesting series as well, because you also have Ime Udoka making the right call, saying it wasn't their role players, it's their stars that lost the game for them. So maybe you see a different Jason Tatum, a different Jaylen Brown respond to this, because Miami is a complex team, but they're very sound defensively, where they will whittle teams down and kind of they're more than comfortable with grinding it out, as someone who watched them grind it out with the Cavs many times this season. But I wouldn't be surprised if Boston wins. It just depends on what you get from Jimmy Butler as well, who was actually absolutely out of his mind in game 1. If you get that again, and also that home crowd advantage in Miami and just that momentum shift, I would be worried if I were Boston heading back to their home court in game 3.
How many games do you think this one goes?
I think so. At the top, when I was asked about the conference finals, I was the boring pick and said Warriors Heat. I think this one goes to 6, possibly 7. But again, a lot like Dallas, it depends on how Boston responds tonight. Just after they got punched in the face, they were relatively competitive for the most of this game, and then Miami really pulled it away in the fourth quarter. So depending on how they respond, if they don't look like they have the right disposition, or look like they just are gassed or fatigued, or like they just can't figure out the Heat, I would feel more comfortable to say possibly 5 for Miami.
Okay, I would love to see it. I'm a Miami Heat's fan, so I'd love to see them get through in this one. Now, let's talk Cleveland. Let's talk the Cleveland Browns. What are you thinking for the team for this season? Who's going to be the starting quarterback? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's going to be Deshaun Watson at some point, but I personally think what he did was disgusting, and I think the way the Browns handled this was gross as well, and disrespectful to a lot of the female fans and their fan base and the women who cover this team and also work in the organization as well. But especially when you attach that kind of price tag to him. But I think just having Jacoby Brissett as a backup, even having Josh Dobbs, who is more of a training camp body and possibly a third string emergency quarterback as well, just heading into camp and preseason as well, is interesting too. But if you really look at it, it's going to be Deshaun Watson. I just think as the NFL begins their investigation and start to speak to him, especially now that he said that what one of the women said was accurate during a deposition, that's a kind of a damning statement in itself. And you just have to see how the NFL, how long they suspend him for. It could be 4 games, it could be 6 games, it could be the entire season. It just depends on how long he's suspended for. And I just think, even though the Browns made this move, this is a bit of a controversial opinion in Cleveland at least, they're still the third best team in the AFC North. Cincinnati just made it to the Super Bowl, and they
Yep.
fixed their offensive line to help keep Joe Burrow standing up straight. And I think their defense has gotten better as well. I think Baltimore will be improved just because Lamar Jackson is a former MVP and they're a very talented team with a very elite head coach.
Yep.
There's a lot of unprovens in Cleveland. I think last season was really a lot of just a perfect storm of things going wrong at once for them. But it's just interesting to say, like, they make all these moves. They are the must see attraction, the side show circus that of the AFC, but they're still firmly in third place in the AFC North. And in the grand scheme of the AFC, you have Buffalo, you have Kansas City, you have, I mean, New England. I'm never going to say Bill Belichick can be counted out, so you have them as well. Like, there's a lot of good teams in the AFC on top of Cincinnati and Baltimore as well. That there's only so many spots to go around
Yep.
in the conference in general. And then there's also Denver, Oakland, Los Angeles. Like, all those teams are great as well. So it's tricky to say what's going to happen, but just in terms of the starting quarterback, it will be Deshaun Watson at some point. It's just a matter of how long he's suspended.
Yeah, and great question here, one that I was going to ask you as well. What do you think the Browns end up doing with Baker Mayfield?
Well, they're going to tell him to stay home. I think that's the first and foremost thing. You never wish injuries on teams or any player in general. You never wish that on anyone, but I think if you're Cleveland, you kind of wait to see what happens during camp. Maybe it's like a Teddy Bridgewater situation where when Bridgewater blew out his knee in Minnesota, the Vikings went and got Sam Bradford. If it's a situation like that, I think that's a tenable path for Mayfield to be starting for a team, but I think he needs to swallow his pride a little bit as well and maybe open up to the opportunity that he could be a backup somewhere as well if a team's willing to take a stab at him. So if you look at a team like Tampa Bay, Tom Brady will be there for as long as he wants to be. This could possibly be his last year. He keep dragging this out year by year, but if you're Mayfield, you can get behind him. You can get acclimated to the system, and if you're Tampa Bay, you can just pick up right where you left off, hopefully, and continue what you're doing and maybe build a dynasty there. But I don't know where he's going to end up. I felt like Carolina made like a viable option. I know it was reported around the draft that the Browns and the Panthers had discussions about trading Mayfield there, but it kind of fell apart, and the Panthers took Matt Corral, and they're comfortable rolling into next season with Darnold and Corral. And then a lot of people keep saying Seattle. I know Baker himself said, like, I know Seattle remains an option, but if you're the Seahawks, why? I understand maybe if you want to upgrade the quarterback position, because I'm a Broncos fan and I've seen a lot of Drew Lock, and I don't think Drew Lock's the permanent solution in Seattle, obviously. But if you're the Seahawks, if you traded for Baker Mayfield, that could easily bump you up a couple wins just because he is a talented enough quarterback. If you keep him upright, I think he had a bad season. I think a lot of that can be attributed to the shoulder injury and just the general toxicity in Cleveland, just and the fallout in general there. But if you're Seattle, why would you trade for Baker, who could possibly be just a marginal or an average quarterback or possibly above average, when this year's draft class has a lot of promising quarterbacks and they're cost controlled for the next 5 years as well? So you don't have to stare Baker Mayfield down and say, okay, we're going to pay you 20 to 25 million just to keep you around for the next foreseeable future, or you can have a cost controlled option and maximize your options elsewhere. So again, it's a lot of uncertainty. Just, you have to see how this pans out. You hope, again, no one really gets seriously injured, but maybe a team comes calling come training camp time or closer to the start of the season and say, like, okay, we'll take a stab at Baker. But I think a lot of it too is he needs to get out of his own way as well. I think he needs to shut things down for cast to say certain things and just let the Browns handle the due process and try and get him out of there, because I keep saying it's still only going to get worse before it gets better, and I don't know how it gets much worse than this.
Yeah, it's gonna be difficult for sure. Let's look at the schedule quick. What do you think of the schedule to start off the season? It looks pretty light for you guys. You opening game on September 11th against the Panthers. You then face the Jets, the Steelers, the Falcons, and then my Chargers. What are your thoughts on these first five?
I think the Chargers are obviously the toughest opponent. I think they're just a very good team. I think defensively, they're just so sound with Bosa and Mack. And then they obviously have Justin Herbert, who is an incredible quarterback, but it's a pretty favorable stretch, like you said, to start. I think the Panthers, they do have Christian McCaffrey, so he'll be a little healthier, a little fresher to start the season. So that obviously will be a problem. But you have them, the Jets, the Steelers. Like those are favorable games for you. And I think if you're Cleveland, especially if you don't have Deshaun Watson under center, because I would imagine he's suspended at this point just due to the misconduct of what happened for 22 separate instances. But if you're able to build a rapport and a momentum to get Jacoby Brissett feeling comfortable and feeling confident, who I think is a fine backup for Cleveland, that will help you build a momentum shift to maybe weather this storm, quote unquote, for when the schedule gets a little more difficult. I wrote for Right Down Euclid. I think they finished the season 11-7 and third in the AFC North, just because Cincinnati and Baltimore are big questions. But obviously, it's hard to fully speculate right now in May when this is not going to happen until September, when rosters aren't fully finalized. There's still probably moves to be made. Obviously, injuries can happen. Things can change between now and September. And like Baltimore or Cincinnati could be dramatically different teams. Things could happen to them during the season as well. But I think they'll go 11-7 overall, just based on where they're at right now. I just need to see where they're headed at this point too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a great season. I can't wait to see what we have out of all of these teams. I'm a huge Bolts fan, huge NFL fan. So it's going to be amazing, amazing season.
Mm-hmm.
But Evan, I won't keep you too long. I know you have a million things to get done today. Can you remind everyone where to find you on all your social outlets?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me again. I really appreciate it. But you can find me on Twitter, Instagram at amnotevan. You can just look up my first and last name. You can find my professional Facebook page there. I write for Meta Bulletins. Right Down Euclid is my primary wheelhouse. You can subscribe using a Facebook account or email address. Just content usually comes out 3 to 4 times a week there, and there's usually a recap as well. Also on LockedOnCavs on YouTube or anywhere you find your podcast if you want to listen to my voice a little bit longer. But thank you again for having me. And everyone, if you want to come check me out, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Evan. You guys make sure you go give him a follow. I like listening to his voice, and I'm sure you guys do too. So, Evan, thank you so much for joining me. We definitely have to do this again.